Welcome everybody. Today is Tuesday, July 15, 2014. This is the Pickens County Board of County Commissioners work session. And first on our agenda today, or actually we've had a wonderful employee appreciation picnic out front. John was flipping burgers and had a bunch of everything, but some of Steve's rhubarb cake or brownies were really tasty. Rhubarb cake.
I missed that.
And now we're going to go into a discussion with full bellies about the Future Air Service Study Phase 3. And Jim's here. Jim Elwood is here to talk to us about that.
Wonderful. Thanks for your time today. Jim Elwood, I'm your airport director. Joining me as well in the room is Brian Griefey, who is our Assistant Director of Aviation for Administration.
He stepped out.
That's a shame. He is nearby. I'd also like to reintroduce Hillary Fletcher with JAviation as one of our support team members, as well as the principal of JAviation, J.D. Ingram. As you recall, we've done a lot of work to date, and when we started this air service study, it was decided that we should really approach it in a kind of a step-by-step process, and I think that's proven to be really valuable and smart. You recall Phase 1 was an analysis to look forward at our air service in our community and what that would mean and what changes are coming and how would we be thinking ahead and be proactive to understand what that changing airline service might look like to our community. And from that, we learned that there is changes that are going to be substantial to our community, and that the airplane that provides most all of our commercial air service will be about 50% of that fleet will be retired in 2021. That fleet will be out of the market, out of service in the airline industry, at least in North America, by 2025. So while that seems like a long time away, it really is only about 10 years, and we've got some things we need to understand and be ready for that inevitability. So the board directed us to go forward with Phase 2 of that analysis, which was to say, if we run the risk, as significant as it appears to be, that we will lose commercial air service at our airport without thinking about what next steps we should be considering, we went forward with Phase 2. And Phase 2 really looked at the options that were available within our existing airport to account for the changing dynamic in that airline industry. And specifically drawn back to the fact that we're limited to wingspans of 95 feet of aircraft of all types, whether it's commercial aircraft or not. And the airplanes that are being produced to replace the existing fleet all have wingspans in excess of 95 feet. And you may recall those, the Mitsubishi regional jet. And I want to point out all of the analysis we've done has been based on similar type aircraft than we've always seen at our airport along the way. So the Mitsubishi aircraft has a wingspan of 96 feet. The Embraer aircraft that we thought most likely to serve our market into the future, if possible, was the EMB E2. That's an airplane that's expected to come online in 2018 into the fleet. And additionally, the airplane manufacturer that currently produces our CRJ 700, that airplane, the replacement airplane for that is the CS100-300 series airplanes. It has a wingspan of 115 feet. Even though the overall seating capacity is pretty similar to some airplanes we've seen historically here, the fact is that the wingspans are growing. And the reason for that really came down to efficiency. To better use less fuel and be able to carry people further with lower cost, one of the ways that the airlines are looking to do that, and the aircraft manufacturers specifically, is by increasing the wingspan to make it more efficient. Phase 3 here in front of us, and oh, by the way, we presented that data online, and anyone who wants to watch the presentation on Phase 2 is available from your board meeting on the 25th of June. We met with the FAA, kind of bringing you up to speed. We met with the FAA on the 30th of June, following that work session with all of you, and the FAA gave us several tasks that are actually included here in Phase 3 that they wanted to see happen. Overall, Phase 3 has about 10 different line items that are outlined, 9 in Step A and 1 in Step B. The Phase 3 was really originally focused to be on community outreach, so we could really share what we've learned in Phase 1 and Phase 2 with the community and start to get their feedback and work it such a way that the community understood the issues, they had a chance to weigh in and offer feedback that would be valuable to all of us. But I do kind of want to take a moment and draw your attention to the steps. Step 1, project schedule. A project schedule is incredibly valuable to us because we have a lot of moving parts at the airport that we want to make sure are covered. And I think we have a responsibility to make sure that the community can kind of see how the timelines play out into the future, and that we can talk intelligently with them about, if decisions are made, what would that look like and when are those decision points. Item number 2 is further the aircraft capability assessment. As you recall, we had Embraer join us at one of the early meetings on this subject. We've also had great support from, we had Bombardier join us. Embraer has also been the other aircraft manufacturer that we've worked closely with in this. But there's a difference between what an airline will use as their performance decision points, how they use the airplane in the field, versus how a manufacturer, tells in terms of range and performance and other things. Most of the time, an airline will have much more stringent operating criteria for an aircraft in their fleet than the manufacturer necessarily would put out there as operating parameters. So we really need to understand that issue so the community can have the discussion about what does that really mean to us. It's a big part of what we'd learn out of that. Item number 3.
Jim, can I ask a question? Jim, so are you talking to the carriers themselves in item 2? Is that what we're talking about here?
Through item number 2, we would end up using a third-party firm who is familiar with all of the airline's operating procedures and practices, and then we'll apply those onto the airplanes that might serve our market. And that will tell us a couple things. Is one, whether or not that particular airplane is capable of operating in our environment, given our field elevation and terrain and all the things we know about here. So but it's another very detailed analysis to make sure we know exactly what an airplane's capable of doing, and that we can answer questions about its performance with a high degree of certainty.
So where do the carriers come in then? I mean, wouldn't it be easier just to skip to a carrier and say to United, what's your profile in 10 years, 15 years?
Well, if they're willing to share that competitive inside information, would be the first thing that would come to mind. And additionally, that's not necessarily going to be high on their priority list. There are firms of which would be a subcontractor to this work who know what those operating practices are and what those airlines' expectations are. So we can come with some degree of accuracy and be able to share with you that X airplane would be capable of doing this if flown by a major air carrier, or any of the air carriers. Updated financial planning. We've added about $80 million worth of work to the potential capital improvement program in this, and I think it's appropriate that we kind of revisit how the financial plan would be impacted by those changes, should they be pursued. The capital improvement plan, once again, this item is one of the key ones that the FAA looks for, is we need to do an update just to see how it fits into the overall construction timetable. That will come back and tie into item number 1, which is that project schedule. Because we're going to have to manage not just length of construction if we go forward with this, but also what year and what financing mechanism we can utilize to get it done. Project phasing, we did a rough part of that in phase 2, but this further refines kind of how projects might move forward and what their real impacts might look like. Number 6 is the one that we really started out. That was the original phase 3 of our discussion way back when in the fall. And this is about making sure that the community knows what is going on at the airport. And there's a number of outreach components in there. The key here really is to make sure that we've got the right kind of information collected, put it in a format that we can really talk to the community about in a positive, or at least a very common sense way. And that's how this was built. Presentations to all of you. We're going to need to make sure we're back in front of you and be able to share the information as we progress. I should point out that all of this is really built on kind of an evolutionary process. We expect that when we go out to talk to the community that they will have some ideas about how we might solve this issue or see it in a different way. We want to be respectful of that and find ways to respond and either do additional legwork and research as it might be necessary, or at least do enough to say we looked at it and these are why that won't work, or gee, maybe it is a good idea and we pursue it a little further. Our significant financial partner, item number 8, is to make sure that we have routine meetings with the FAA and keep them included in our process. We'll be hopeful that the FAA will pay upwards of 90% of any changes that might ultimately be decided on, and we want to make sure that they understand those details thoroughly. Item number 9, these are just kind of miscellaneous pieces of the puzzle. Step B, and I want to talk just a little bit about Step A is really broken down into a couple of chunks. So when you look at the overall project itself, which is substantial in terms of total cost, the fact is Step A, if you look at items 1, 3, 4, and 5, those are all driven by FAA expectations, but they also fall directly under what our community expects in terms of solid data and feedback. 6 and 7, those are really based on the community and focused on making sure that you all as electeds and policy makers have current and pertinent information to work from as well, and sharing that information with you. 8 and 9 are really broken down into what does it take to make this all kind of come together and gel. So there'd be a pause at the end of Step A. We would be back with you sharing all the information that we've gathered. And then there'll be a decision point by the board. We've included it in the budget, but there'd be a decision point because now we'll have documents that'll be ready to be submitted to the FAA, which we call the Airport Layout Plan. And that is a schematic of the airport that shows possible improvements on the horizon, and we would submit that document to the FAA after signature by the BOCC, should that decision. So there's kind of a pause there. You direct staff whether to go ahead and submit those documents on to the FAA. That step's key because without a project being on the airport layout plan, it is not eligible for federal funding. So, that's kind of there'll be multiple decision points along the way, but that one will be a key one. So, in a nutshell, we've got a great deal of work represented in this project, and our history at the airport is to do outreach at a high level, do as much as we can reasonably to communicate, and we're anxious to get underway with this project. Time is valuable as we move forward.
George?
Thanks, Jim. I got a couple of questions. I'm trying to figure out and I've asked this to you before, sort of the nexus between this series of studies and the work we've done with the master plan and the potential new terminal expansion. So that's a whole separate project, not part of this, but there is a connection. So I'm just trying to figure out how that all fits together in terms of time frames and the airport layout plan. How is that different than the master plan that we've gone through and the FAA has approved?
Wonderful questions, George. Absolutely. All of the parts that are currently at play at the airport have interconnectability and common points that need to be coordinated. What I was envisioning in terms of project schedule, be it the second FBO or it be a new terminal building and other issues that we're looking at the airport, item number one in this work plan is absolutely so very important, and it would be our intent to put that together, that particular piece of scope, back together and bring it to you in the next handful of weeks or so. I haven't quite worked that coordination out with everyone, but to be able to put all of the pieces of the puzzle moving forward and be able to talk about how those pieces kind of fit together. We could end up with two sizable projects kind of moving in parallel course, but I think that once the calendar or the schedule is created, that's when we'll be back with you and kind of show you how it can play out, because they are important to each other. How this project relates to the master plan, obviously we did a tremendous amount of work on the master plan. It basically sets the east side of the airport in a very stable way. The only thing we ever submitted in the master plan to the FAA is the airport layout plan, or the ALP. So this would be taking what we built on in the master plan, doing the due diligence we're about to kick off here, and producing a new airport layout plan that would be submitted to the FAA at the end of that end of this project if it goes through Step B. So I hope I've answered your question, George. We're basically building on the master plan's work with this new information.
And George, I'd just add that the FAA approved everything really except that separation between the runway and the taxiway on the west side. That was one of the question marks that led us to conduct this study and this analysis. So the approval was not an unconditional approval or what have you. It had conditions on it that caused us to step back and say, well, what does this mean for our current and future aircraft service? And so it will affect that airport layout plan that we submitted to the FAA for approval. Presumably this would be a modification. And Jim and I have had a discussion about the need to come back because we do have at least, I'd say, 3 significant moving parts or potential projects that are going to need to be coordinated and synced up. And that, I think staff has been closer to it, and so we have been thinking about it a lot, but we may not have done as good a job communicating that in these meetings, so we need to come back and do that.
Right. The other questions I have are, one's related to budget. So this is a fairly expensive line item, again, for supplemental budget. You've got about $10,300,000 in the fund balance. For us, perhaps for the public, where do those monies come from, and how those monies? What's the role of those funds? I mean, how are they supposed to be used?
The airport fund under state statute is an enterprise fund, so we do stand alone. Pleased to report to you, as you already know, but that we don't take any property or sales tax dollars to operate the airport. So the funds that have become that reserves are funds that we've collected from landing fees and fuel flowage fees and other things that happen at the airport as part of a business practice, business enterprise. And so, and these funds by federal law are not allowed to be used elsewhere in the county. They must be used at the airport under federal criteria. So we've managed to have our fund balance get to a point where it has the ability to make these kind of decisions, for us to be proactive about solving problems. If we had to wait for all of the pieces to come together and we weren't trying to be proactive, it would certainly cost a great deal of time and most likely ultimately more money than we're talking about here.
All right, thanks.
Michael?
Jim, I had a conversation outside during the picnic, and the woman I was talking to said, well, you're just planning to get more people in here. That's what this is all about, right? And I said, well, so I'll pose that question to you. Is that what this is about? Are we planning just to get more people here?
I think it's pretty clear that it's really not focused in that way at all, and I can appreciate that perspective for sure. But all you have to do is look at the split about how people find our valley and get to our valley. About 50% of our visitors come through the Aspen-Pickens County Airport, but another 50% come by some kind of rubber tire up Highway 82 or in the summer over Independence Pass. This project is really about how do we protect commercial air service in our community into the future. And could we see a slightly different airplane than we've seen historically? That's a potential outcome, but I still think we're going to be limited by all the other conditions that are in place already here. And so the answer to your question in a simple way is no. My prediction of this, based on everything I know, is that it doesn't bring more people. It just protects the people who have been coming to our community and perhaps gives them another option to get here, and that's about it.
Jim, has there ever been any sort of study done on the economic benefit of our airport and what dollar value that brings to our community?
There sure has. The state of Colorado has done 3 different, maybe 4 different economic impact studies on the airport over the past 10 or 12 years. The most recent one, the economic impact of the airport on the community is approaching $900 million per annum. So when you look at some of these items against expenditures against some of those issues, the airport has a sizable piece of the local community's economic viability.
And my next question is, with 1 through 9 in Step A, what's the anticipated, I know Step 1 is kind of the big schedule, but that has things that are beyond Step 9, actual construction and those sorts of things. But what's the anticipated order of 1 through 9? Are they all in sequence together? Do we look at number 1 first and then jump to a little community outreach and then jump back to 2? Is there a sequencing of how these are most effective?
Yes, really. Good question, Rob. The project schedule, obviously, that's right at the very forefront of what we need to do, as well as the aircraft capability piece. Those can begin almost immediately. The financial planning, the CIP, some of the project phasing, that's going to be a little further into the timetable just because we need to know what it is we'd be talking about and make sure that we've got our pricing based on, if we hear some things in the community outreach portion that are good ideas and we think are enhancements and smart paths forward, there could be a pricing adjustment. And so those need to kind of come once we kind of understand where we're pointed and what those projects are all about. Community outreach is also one on the front. It's going to start almost immediately. So we'll be kind of pulling some pieces together and then start that community dialogue. And of course, the presentations to you will be, periodic through the process. As we learn and get to key milestones, we'll be back with you. And then our partners meetings with the FAA, that'll be ongoing as well. So I guess in a nutshell, you're going to see items 1, 2, and 6 right away. The other items kind of fall into place after that.
Another question that I had was in number 4, the update of the financial planning. I think you said that it would have a $80 million impact to our previous financial plan, which already has some of these expenditures built into it. There were some pre-work done in our master plan and the financial, because the question that not the financial plan, the master plan, the question that was answering was, what can we do based on the financial aspects of things moving forward? So is that difference between the 130 number that we saw in phase 2 and the 80 number that I think you said when you went through this in step A3 is stuff that's already been scheduled?
Absolutely. I'm sorry I didn't describe that a little better as we went through it, Rob. We already had several items in this, in our capital plan that are anticipated as part of our financial analysis. And what we've added is a difference of almost $80 million of additional new work that wasn't contemplated in the master plan. So I appreciate a chance to clarify that. We'll just need to look at how that fits in and what years that funding might be practical to move forward. That fits back into the project schedule. I will tell you that when we come back with the project schedule in a few weeks, it will be also kind of an evolutionary process as well, but we'll give you kind of an expectation of the next 10 years and how those pieces fit together, how the projects would progress. But we all know that when we do forecasts like that, the schedules always get tweaked a little bit as you actually move forward. And I just want to make sure that expectation is clear to all of you, because we'll give you the picture as we see it today, but as time goes by, it'll get moved a little bit here and there, I would expect.
And just to be clear, to kind of bring it back to our last presentation, which was phase 2, that $131 million price tag for an option that's out there in terms of having the runway separation that the FAA requires, really also included some things that were already in our budgetary aspects. So that number is less than that based on the fact that we were already planning on some of those expenditures had we moved forward directly with the master plan.
Correct.
My next question in here, in the step A, 1 through 9, nowhere in here does it have any dollars allocated or studies done regarding the FBO potential on the west side, and how that fits into the timeline of things and how that fits into where we are with that big picture.
The other dimension in the moving parts of the airport at the moment, you'll see that listed out in the project schedule when we create that in terms of where we think that kind of fits into the sequence. This project really is about trying to understand how the air service impacts are at our airport. The other two pieces, the other two significant projects, you mentioned one there, Rob, as well as talking about a terminal building. That's an additional project. You'll see that in the project schedule. It'll get fed into the CIP. It'll get fed into the financial analysis work. But in the end, this happens to just be one leg of the work going forward. And we'll do our best to describe how it touches those other two pieces, or another piece that may come to us between now and whenever. But it'll be a touch point onto this document.
Other questions, Steve?
Jim, are there any unintended consequences way down the road from pursuing the course of action that we're kind of looking at widening the runway and moving it farther to the west? For instance, I'm reminded of a friend who flew from Phoenix to Montrose Airport, and they could not unload the people at the Montrose Airport off of that type of airplane because of the capabilities they had in Montrose, and they had to fly back to Phoenix and change airplanes and come back. So we're kind of building this with this new fleet of aircraft coming in, and is that going to predetermine what our potential new terminal is going to be like, or anything that we're not really thinking of at this point, the unintended consequences?
Well, I think your question's on target, Steve. One of the reasons that we're doing such comprehensive studies on all these subjects is to make sure that we can understand and respond to that question. I'll expand it a little bit, as we've heard from the community on everything that we've ever talked about at the airport, in my tenure anyway, is that's one of the main concerns of this community. What are the unintended consequences of a decision that's made, and what will that mean to us and future generations in our community? And so that's one of the reasons that we go to such a depth to try to understand subjects and be responsive to questions that we get from the community, is because those unintended consequences need to be thoughtfully understood. You gave an example about aircraft not being able to function after they landed. I think we'll avoid that particular unintended consequence through our work, but that, what I've always heard from our community is, tell me what that means at my house, in the valley. If I live in Woody Creek or I live in town, tell me what changes are going to happen, or what does that mean to me at my house? Does that mean more noise, less noise? Does it mean more airplanes, less airplanes? Share with us what is really going to happen and impact our little, piece of the world, and help them understand that. And I think we've worked really hard to try to do that in all our projects along the way, including sending noise monitors to interested parties' houses and doing, a multitude of things to try to make sure that we're sharing the very, very best information that we can generate and give them the best forecasting and understanding that we can possibly produce.
Thank you. George?
I want to go back to the funding mechanisms. The FAA had required airports every 10 years or so to do an updated master plan, which they then have to approve. This project, the FAA has required certain steps as you work towards an airport layout plan. So if and when that is approved by the FAA, then between that and the master plan, that opens up opportunities for FAA grants that would go towards the start of these projects. And is that built into that sort of, at least that one option estimate costs about $130 million?
The answer to that question is yes, George. You got the sequence exactly right. We did a master plan. These are follow-up, kind of additional details that we've learned since the master plan was complete. And we'll take these, and then once the ALP goes into the FAA, that allows them to do an environmental work that might be required to talk about any of the projects that are on that airport layout plan, and to fund construction should all the things line up and people believe that's the right thing to do after all the analysis. So it creates the eligibility process. I'm not sure I still hit your question right on, George.
But that offers us the opportunity to go out for FAA grants to help move these projects along, where we would not be able to do that had we not gone through these processes.
Yes.
Yeah. Because, similar to the master plan, when we went through that process and we reserved up to 80,000 square feet for a possible terminal, of course, we never said we were going to do an 80,000 square foot terminal, but that's what the headlines. So the headlines, here's a project that may cost up to $130 million, but it's not going to be on the back of the community.
A really good point, George. I'm sorry I didn't quite get all the way through it. The fact is that of the $130 million that we talked about for one of the concepts we presented as an option back in June, up to 90% of those dollars could come through the FAA Airport Improvement Program grant funds, which I think is important for the community to know that that is not part of your April 15th tax obligation either. Not only does the airport not take money for sales or property tax locally, but the monies that go into those grant, that come back as grant dollars, are generated through people purchasing airline tickets and general aviation fuel and other things across the nation. And, quite some time ago, the federal government made a very smart decision. They visualized that the entire network of aviation across the country was one kind of big unit, and that they needed capability at communities and airports across the country. And when they put that together, they put together a use fee program. So if you buy an airline ticket, I think it's 7.5% of every airline ticket sold goes into that aviation trust fund. If you buy general aviation fuel, it goes into the aviation trust fund. And then annually, Congress appropriates a certain amount of money out of that aviation trust fund to be given to grants to airports across the country to improve safety efficiency of the national transportation system, air transportation system. So the fact is that those grant dollars are ones that are designed to, improve safety, improve capability of the whole aviation network, and are not part of people's April 15th tax bill.
And my last question is on the community outreach program. You did an excellent job, I felt, when you did the outreach informational segment for the master plan. And similar process, and is it also sort of tied into sort of a similar budgetary cost for this segment as it was for the master plan?
The answer is yes and yes. And thank you for the compliment. We worked really hard at sharing that information with the community, and hopefully people found it worthwhile. When you look at what we spent relative to the budget on the master plan, it was comparable or perhaps more than we're talking about here. This particular plan is more focused in a 6-month window. The master plan was a multiple year program, and so this is more compressed and condensed in terms of how it's designed today. If there's one thing I've kind of learned after time in the community, and especially with the master plan and to some extent the runway extension, is that it takes about what time it takes for the community to kind of come around and understand the subject and either get comfortable or be concerned, and so we'll take as much time as we need, but this one was programmed to be 6 months.
Additional questions?
Well, I would just say I support this moving ahead. I think this is the next obvious step for us to try to address the future of our airport and the future and how that's going to impact the community long term.
Steve?
I also would support moving ahead with this next phase of the study.
I'm in favor of this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Did you want to introduce the next subject?
Yeah, I think we can move right into the next subject. I see Dave in the back of the room.
Actually, Dan will be here
Oh.
shortly.
Sorry.
Well, with that, I want to introduce Brian Griefey to the table, if I might. Brian's going to lead you through this a little bit.
I want to make sure that Dave's here as well for whatever we start.
Just take a moment to get this formed up.
Rob, we're going to use the projector for a little bit, and why don't you take this chair, Brian?
John, should we maybe... There he is. Great. We're a little ahead of schedule, so thank
My
you.
apologies.
Thank you for being here. Not your fault. We're glad we're ahead of schedule.
I bet.
Brian, take the floor.
Great, well, thank you. Really, this is just an opportunity to introduce our new partner out at the airport. Dave Strentz here with All Star Media. Since they've taken over the advertising concession at the beginning of the month, been a lot of changes, a lot of compliments. There's been some concerns, and Dave and myself are really here, really just to explain the program to everybody, and see if there's any questions out there, and really give you an understanding of the new program that we're very excited about. So before we get started, Dave is in All Star Media, is a local company. I'm so excited to have a local working at the airport.
Locally owned and operated. Do you want me to run through the
Yeah.
PowerPoint? Would that be the best way to start for everyone?
Sure.
Okay. Go ahead. You've gone too far.
There we go.
There we go. Basically, what we did when we came up with the idea to put an airport program together was to come up with a concept where we had something for everyone. We decided as a company that the old school, traditional, just standard backlit signs was sort of old school products, 20th century type stuff, and we wanted to take us into the digital age, so to speak. So what we decided to do was invest in some large format video walls that, if you've been to the airport recently, you see they got installed on July 1st, and they look fabulous. They've done everything that we've wanted them to do thus far. But we realized also that we didn't want to price ourselves out of the local market, so we really wanted to sort of come up with an opportunity that everybody in the valley could afford, whether you were, in Rachel's case, using some examples of if you were a babysitter, trying to promote your babysitting service, all the way up to being a larger local account or even a national account. So the first order of business that I had was I reached out to Aspen Activity Center, and I worked a very aggressive deal with them in their favor, with one condition, that they would take care of the locals, take care of all the chamber members in a much more financially productive way than my predecessors did. So we have the brochure racks as one option, and I'm going to touch on each one of these as we go through the PowerPoint, but I'm just going to highlight pretty much the four main opportunities that we have throughout the airport. The next opportunity we came up with, which is, as you can tell, the brochure racks is the top left corner. Top right corner is what we're calling Locals Corner, and those are back-to-back plasma screens. There's actually, if you can see the Jazz Aspen ad on it right now, there's an exact mirror image on the other side, and that's a product that we moved. If you recall where the brochure rack is in baggage claim, it's as you come up the after you deplane and you come up the corridor there, it was right off to your left, adjacent to the chamber's office there. I never found that to be a good location, so what I felt was more conducive for the locals to have a better well-placed brochure rack was to move it into the center of baggage claim. So while you can't really tell from this photo, but we have some other stuff you'll see in a little bit, the brochure rack is actually now strategically placed between the two baggage claims. It does not interfere with flow of traffic, but it's much, much more well-placed. So advertising, like real estate, is all about location, location, location. This is a much better location. So we're trying to create this local feel, and I remember flying into Kauai many, many years ago, and the brochure racks were important when I got there. I wanted to know about, where I can get scuba gear, where we could take a helicopter ride, and I think that's what people want when they come into Aspen. They want to know where they can go for dinner, they want to know where the activities are, and this is a great opportunity for them as soon as they land. Moving to the bottom left, we're using static signage. We're not getting rid of it completely, so we are using some strategically placed locations for a number of different clients, both local and national potentially, for some static signage. And then, of course, the bottom right-hand corner is our video walls, which we've placed 5 in the airport, 3 in baggage claim and 2 in departures.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
On the second one, the new brochure display area that's in between the two baggage areas, didn't there used to be a display set up there as well? Sort of a glassed-in display that had sort of different items in there, whether it be clothing or...
There's
in other words, there was already space that had been allocated for a use. It wasn't that we...
If you're talking about the large glass case, you might be thinking of Obermeyer.
Yes.
And that's as you're exiting. So it's not, it's further...
And that's still there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
At the moment, yeah.
Okay.
There was a plant and airport diagram that was replaced when we put that in there. The diagram was basically just a schematic of the terminal, had identified few areas in the terminal where to find the restaurant, ticketing, bag claim, etc. Wasn't overly utilized. Before we moved it, we talked to guest services, talked to the airlines, bag claim folks to see how well it was utilized, and mostly went unnoticed. We are looking at repurposing that in the terminal building, but right now that's what was in that exact location.
Okay.
So this is, unfortunately Rachel isn't here, but I think she'd really appreciate this. Getting back to my comment about being very aggressive with Aspen Activity Center, the reason I did a deal with them was such that they are obligated to offer a significantly more aggressive price for their customers as well. And so as you can see, their pricing to put a brochure out at the airport is 45%, is a savings of 45% versus the previous airport vendor. And again, I think it's really important, as you can see from the map, the old location where the blue arrow is versus the new location where the red box is highlights exactly why we chose to put it there. It's where people congregate. You got a good 15-20 minutes of captive audience. It makes so much more sense to be there. And you can see, I see it myself. I'm out at the airport every day, of course, babysitting the baby new. And you can see that people are taking the brochures much more aggressively than before, which is good business for everyone. Again, just to touch on the locals corner, for the most part, we're saving all space on this. And so, in case you're wondering, so this is a digital screen. It's a plasma screen, about the size of that painting behind Steve's head. And it runs full motion video or static content. And we're working with the locals. We've got a nice long list of local clientele that are already on the boards. And we're reserving that space just for locals. And it's a much more affordable option than the video screens and still extremely well positioned.
Just for the commissioners, there was a letter from Jim Wingers complaining about this locals corner construction that was going on. He felt that it was taking up a lot of square feet right in a very congested area. And it is the ideal location for people waiting for their luggage to look at pick up the literature and get the maps and all those sorts of things. So what, is there anything that determined the square footage of the magazine rack or anything like that?
I can comment on
Go
that a
ahead.
little bit if you don't mind. That was a very valid concern, and actually we looked at that. Visually, it does look, it has much more of a presence, but between the plants and the signage we had there before, really doesn't take up a lot more room in actual circulation space. So that's one area we did look at, but it is physically larger, it's more noticeable, and frankly, it's a little different. It's different than what we've seen for the last 10 years or so, and people will comment on that, we found. Did that answer your question?
So that was, yeah, his was a negative comment, and then I went out to the airport to look at it, and I personally find it very attractive and, you know, a good place for the literature to be displayed.
Yeah.
And then having the video display up above is something that the old little triangular shape or pyramidal shape kind of a thing didn't have any
No, it
room
didn't
for anything
accomplish
like
it.
that.
If Jeb and Alana from Aspen Activity Center were here right now, they would tell you they're elated with the new location and the response they're getting from their customers. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a huge win for the local community. Next. Static signage is really just sort of old school signage, but it's important to have at the airport. We can't go all digital, so when you go through airports today, you'll find that many airports have moved towards digital, but they still retain a certain element of static signage. And we want to be able to be flexible for our clients and provide value. So these are very similar to what you've seen in the past out at the airport. A little bit different, but much lower maintenance and nice, beautiful graphics.
And flexible clients.
Flexible clients, too. Yeah. We were going to use Chris Klug in that shot. But and then this is really the meat and potatoes of the project. And what we did was we came up with a series of locations that we felt were strategically conducive for video walls. Again, they run full motion video. In the baggage claim area, we have 3. So you've got one over each baggage carousel and then one on the far east wall. The way the product works is all 3 screens run the same content concurrently. So if you've ever been to Times Square and there's 150 different advertisements going on, it's very confusing. I chose to go a different route, and so what I do, we invested in a very elaborate and sophisticated computer system that controls all of our screens. And the reason we went this route is we think that the visitors are going to appreciate this more. They're going to come in and they're going to have fabulous welcome messaging. They're going to have what we call a sense of place. We're working with our clients very closely on the content they're providing us. We have final say on their content. So we want to make sure when somebody lands at Aspen Airport that they know that they're in the Roaring Fork Valley, that they know that they're in Snowmass, they know that they're in Aspen, they know that they're in one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And so we're really pushing that type of content from our clients. And thus far, that's what we're seeing. And we've had nothing but great feedback from everybody that I've spoken with. And a lot of times, I don't even tell them I own the screens. I simply just ask them people's reactions. They say, this is really cool. And it is. This is one of the most unique media opportunities you'll see in an airport, period. I don't care if it's JFK, DIA, or Aspen. This is unique and this is neat. People love it.
So the day I was at the airport, they were showing a kayaker going down a waterfall.
Yeah.
Is that somewhere here in the Roaring Fork Valley?
Well, we're
where is
working on
footage
that. That's GoPro footage. And because of sort of the short-term turnaround time that we had to get content up to hit our July 1st start date, we really pushed them to give us Aspen-like content. So the truth of the matter is that is not Aspen per se. However, GoPro has a huge library of content, and a lot of it happens to be Aspen, as you can imagine, from various different things. And as we change seasonally, we'll see it going from mountain biking and fly fishing and kayak and whitewater rafting to cross-country skiing and snowboarding and all those things. So, no, but soon. We also have 2 walls. So here's a video clip of what it looks like. So sort of what we're doing, aside from just working with clients, is we're also, we just started getting some content going from Chris Klug's foundation, and we're going to do a lot of public service announcements. The beauty of digital is we'll have the ability to change creative literally at a moment's notice. So whether we're updating a current client's creative or if Wounded Warriors is coming to Aspen, and I've done some stuff with them in the past, we'll be able to take content from Wounded Warriors, run it on our screens, and have welcome messaging when they're coming in. And then the beauty of the departure screens as well is we'll have that opportunity, and I think they'll really appreciate that. And those are just two examples of the public service announcements that we'll be able to provide. They will be so much more dynamic and captivating and useful than the old school type of media that was out there in the past. Another example would be the Pro Challenge. The airport's going to close for access a good, I think, 4 hours on the day of the event. And what we're doing is we're working with the airport's ad agency to get creative up on our screens as soon as possible to start educating everybody now that, hey, on August, I think it's 18th or something, that don't plan on being able to drive your car out to the airport. There are options. You will be able to take Raft, I believe, and I think that there's going to be a shuttle service as well, but they need to know about it ahead of time. So we're going to be, we very much view this as a partnership with the airport. And I think it's important to note, I've lived in the Valley for 25 years. My wife is an anesthetist at Aspen Valley for the last 20 years. My kids go to school here. I ran the Aspen Airport program for many years until about an 8 or 10 year hiatus. So this is sort of a coming home party for me of sorts.
Just, I think, a correction. The airport won't be closed for 4 hours. The airport will be open. People just may need to make some arrangements to adjust their timing to make their flights.
Fair enough. Good correction.
And that's great to point out formally that from 1 to 5 that Monday, stage 1 of the bike race, access for personal vehicles will be essentially shut off from up and down Valley. But there are transit opportunities available. You can check out our website, aspenairport.com, for more detailed information, and that's already stood up.
But the point being, we're going to be working with the airport. I just won't be writing the copy for it. That's basically the program.
Questions? Michael?
Dave, thank you for this. I attend the ACRA meetings, the Aspen Chamber Resort Association, and the last, or 2 meetings ago, so it puts it about 2 months ago, there were a number of people who were upset because the price of advertising was so high that they felt they were being priced out of advertising at the airport. I understand that's changed. Is that right?
Well, yeah, 100%. As a matter of fact, I think the one customer that was potentially initially the most concerned turned out to be one of my first contracts. So, ironically, if people come and state their concern to me and we start a negotiation and a discussion, more times than not we'll find a common ground, and in this case we certainly did. And I pride myself on finding that balance where we're going to be able to take as much local business as we can. So, yeah. I think that's a misconception.
Well, it was at the time they were quoted a certain price, and so there was no misconception about their initial quote.
No, the misconception was whether they could come up with a deal.
Right, and so they were concerned.
Sure.
And they were concerned they were going to be priced out of advertising at the airport.
Right.
So as long as there's some direction on your part to accommodate local
100%. Listen,
entities.
when you put a rate card out there, it's not like walking into a restaurant and there's a menu, and I can't walk into a restaurant and say, well, the steak says $26. How about you take 20 and just throw in an app for half price, right? I mean, in my business, that's the way it does work. So we have to start somewhere, as we did with that customer, and we came up with a reasonable solution that we were both happy
Well,
with.
there must have been a time lapse because when they were talking at ACRA, they were an alienated customer. So after that, I guess they were
That's exactly right.
accommodated. So that's a problem, to alienate people and then to accommodate them. it'd be nicer to accommodate initially and then go from there. So I understand the problem solved,
Sure.
and hopefully it'll continue to be solved.
I think so. I think, we're hearing feedback from our potential customers if our pricing, we're coming up with a new product. So advertising, like I said, is a lot like real estate. There are no comps in the Valley for what I do. Right? I mean, if you buy a glossy magazine, you can compare your pricing of Aspen Peak to Sojourner to Aspen Magazine. Similarly with the two newspapers. There's only one airport, and there's no other airport like this. You can't even compare me to Vail. So we're working with our clients to find that happy medium where that price does work for them and works for us. And that's, in this case, we did. And we've subsequently signed several more deals.
Great, thank you,
Yeah.
Dave.
George?
I think we discussed this earlier with Jim, but we have a quality control in terms of types of advertisers that you would take or not accept. Can you just talk about some of those guidelines?
I can comment on that. The admin office does have to approve 100% of all the videos or static signage coming through. Very similar to what we did in the previous contract with Clear Channel. So every bit of content, every image will be approved by the airport administration. And in terms of guidelines on what we approve, what we don't approve, luckily we don't have a lot of questionable content because it is, especially in Dave's example, stuff that's out elsewhere. But generally, shy away from any type of political advertisement, any side or controversy. Stuff you wouldn't expect to see in public places, you won't see it here.
How is the airport compensated for the advertising?
It's a good question. It is a sliding scale of percentage, and I forget the exact percentage, but there's a minimum annual guarantee associated with it. That's $100,000 per contract year. And then if All-Star Media meets certain gross sales percentages, we get, the airport is compensated above that minimum.
So in essence, the better the advertiser does, the better the airport does into its fund balance.
That's correct.
What costs were associated with this for the airport?
None. A little bit of staff time to prepare the procurement, but all of the video you see, all of the infrastructure, a little bit of support time on the airport, that was all procured by All-Star Media.
Other questions? Thank you. I would suggest that we move forward into future agendas, open discussion.
Yeah,
And maybe shoot Dale email and Ron an email.
Yeah, give me just a minute here, I'll do that.
Thank you.
While John is shooting some emails off to get some people down here early, does anybody have any comments that they want to start with on future agendas? George?
But I'll need John's attention, so
Yeah.
I don't want to.
John, future agendas?
The agendas are starting to fill out. Obviously, we had talked about doing some work sessions in August. We will get those set up. Unfortunately, it looks like the only dates are going to work for the strategic plan updates and such are going to be dates that I will not be here, but otherwise I think once we get to the 19th, we lose George and Michael on that day. And yeah, it doesn't make sense for us to be doing updates at that time. So other than that, our future agendas are filling out, and we still have August to work on.
George?
So, John, for a future agenda, I wonder whether we can get an update from GR on CMAQ funds. I thought that it's been quite a while that we gave GR some direction to come back with some pricing options that he had proposed for the use of those CMAQ funds. I think it was some purchases of some electric cars. And we haven't, I don't know what the status is of that, and I know there may be some other potential uses of those funds if the board doesn't want to go in that direction.
Okay.
So I have no idea what the timing is. It seems like it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I know what we were doing was a RFP process. So I need to see where that's at. I don't know where it's at off the top of my head. And then we're going to, based on the RFP process, come back to the board and talk about the CMAQ funding options. So I will look into that.
Any other comments on future agendas? Steve?
There was a thing that came over the email. I was just looking for it, but it was an event in Pagosa Springs about renewable energy and greenhouses and things. It's the exact same time when the Water Congress will be in Snowmass Village, but I thought it might be a good event for George to go to.
I'm out of town. I'm out of town.
Oh, you're out of town right then? Yeah, it's an energy thing that kind of was related to what CORE does, so I thought of you, George, as being one who could represent us, but maybe a staff person could go to that, or maybe Mona or Jason or somebody from CORE could go to the meeting.
And I don't think I received that one.
Let's see, I'll find it. I'll forward it to you, John, if you weren't copied on that. Seemed like a good opportunity for somebody from the county to attend.
Any other comments on future agendas? I know that George had mentioned to start reaching out to neighboring counties about setting up some of those meetings. For the fall, probably, before it gets too late in our schedule into budgeting time frame. Any open discussion for us, John?
Yeah, there is a one item. RAFTA has requested that we sign a letter of support for a grant, the Ladders of Opportunity grant, which would be used for, it looks like remodel and renovation, as well as expansion of RAFTA's bus maintenance facility in Glenwood Springs. Attached is a suggested letter of support for that. So may I just give the board a few minutes to read through that, and we can discuss whether the board would like to send a letter of support for this grant.
Questions? Michael?
Well, I don't have any questions. I would support a letter, but this letter doesn't do it for me. Parts of it are fine, but I think it really needs, if we're going to send it, it needs to state that Picken County was the initiator of public transit and essentially was the father of RAFTA and has seen it grow from 3-use buses to a sophisticated system, whatever history needs to be put in. And we continue to support RAFTA as a member of their jurisdiction, and would hope that they would, be eligible or at least receive this grant. So because the letter really is too oriented towards RAFTA's point of view, we have a kind of a different point of view.
And I would add to that, because RAFTA's going after a grant application, so it's always good for a grantor to know who else is supporting that. And so again, as part of the history that the voters in Picken County have dedicated X amount of times sales tax specifically for mass transit.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, and everyone's good with those changes, and we can make an addition, may take a few things out to do
Yeah,
that.
and all you have to do is talk to Dan Blankenship, and he'll help you with some of the history. He's well aware of the history.
Okay.
I think we should send it from a Picken County point of view, not a RAFTA point of view.
Okay. Only other open discussion item right now, I don't know how we're doing on getting people collected here. We may need to take a few-minute break. Also related to RAFTA, they are also now looking at the next phase of their remodel and expansion plans here in Picken County at their facility near the Public Works properties. That is property that's owned by Picken County, that is leased to basically RAFTA in a long-term lease, and so I did authorize a letter for them to, submit their plans and such to community development to get that process started. So you guys will be seeing that in the future. But just so you know, they are planning to propose a facility expansion and renovation up here also.
I noticed that at the road that goes around CMC to the North 40 by that facility there, they've constructed a new parking lot, which they've been working on for some time now. There's a new walkway in what would be, I think what we looked at is the right-of-way for a potential road that would go to a different light intersection at that junction.
Are you talking going around?
If you go
the
around
facility?
No, if you go around, you pass the fire department on the right, you continue past the fields that John McBride still owns. Mm-hmm. You go around CMC, just as you turn right there, it seems like they've constructed a fairly major what looks like a gravel walkway.
There's always been a path there.
Yeah, I know there's always been a path there.
So they just improved it slightly. And there's no plans for access for a road to go through there. That was our proposal, but it was turned down by the commissioners.
Yeah, I remember, but that was kind of designated as the right-of-way if there were ever going to be an access road along there. So, yeah. I was just curious because I'd never seen anything about it or heard anything about it.
But I think they just improved the existing path. And I don't know whose land that is. It might well be the land that belongs to RAFTA.
Yeah.
But I think
So
it's
it parallels Highway 82.
Right. I know which trail that is, and so that is actually our land, but it's part of what is leased to RAFTA, and that's been an access point between the AABC and, you know, the RAFTA facilities, public works facilities, and animal shelter.
Yeah.
And in fact, when RAFTA does do any renovation or expansion, how that path crosses and is accessed on the other side is going to be one of the major things we'll have to look at.
Steve?
Yeah, that path, it seems kind of like a construction site, and it's a route, people get off the bus at the RAFTA stop and then, or go to CMC that way, is actually the shortest way to get to the CMC building. And Phyllis and I one day walked along there, we were going to a meeting at CMC, and we both got off RAFTA right there, but I would love to see that path improved. It's really a rough.
Well, it seems like they just put a
That's
major.
exactly
Not smoothed out very much at
That's
all.
exactly what they've done, Steve.
Yeah.
So there has been some
Lights, yeah.
improvement, and then when there's additional work done, there's discussion about further improvement to make it easier to maintain, particularly in the winter and such, whether you make it a hard surface path of some kind, but that would come in the future.
And then there's actually been times when I've walked, I want to go into town from Public Works, right when Highway 82 is really busy, and I'll actually walk clear down to the ABC crossing to get across the highway to the RAFTA stop on the other side.
That is a safer way to go.
Yeah, it's safer than risking your neck crossing Highway 82 there when it's really busy.
So there have been some soft surface improvements. I know which trail now, I wasn't tracking with you. There is discussion about potentially doing hard surface because it's difficult to maintain in the winter with a soft surface trail versus a hard surface. But that would come if and when RAFTA does the remodel.
Well, Dale's up next, and I think he has something to add to this, too.
Well, interestingly enough, I was privy to a staff discussion emanating from RAFTA last week, where they asked Open Space whether we would be interested in partnering with a potential extension of that trail all the way down to Baltic somehow. That was the alignment, you may remember, in our Roaring Fork Gorge management plan that we had proposed for the main trail, were there ever to be a bridge across the gorge, it's going to come right through that same route.
Yeah.
So it seems like that's being talked about more and more since the underpass, and we were going to do a little bit of property research because the land between the road over to CMC from Baltic and the highway is owned by a third party in there, and that'd be the most likely spot to add a connection from the RAFTA trail over to Baltic where you can connect to your underpass.
Any other open discussion, or
Not this time.
Dale, you want to step up and talk about budget supplemental for the Roaring Fork Gorge Phase 1?
Sure. I have a page out of the recently adopted Roaring Fork Gorge Management Plan that described all this was coming into the owners and having it projected, or I can just hand these around. But in any event, this was something that really was decided by you and the Open Space Board as part of the adoption this winter of this plan for the Roaring Fork Gorge. And
Dale, do you think you could project it? I mean, this is, you know, the public probably would like to know where the paving's going to occur.
we're finding it's becoming more rare to have a capital project come in within our estimate, and so we're kind of gratified that this one did. Here's the page from the plan. Maybe this should is this.
There's a knob that you just turned.
So, to take everyone back to the process for this management plan, of course, we had a big discussion about a potential bridge a year ago, and it was decided as part of this plan adoption that what we would do is simply pave the lower half of this 4-mile stretch of the section of unpaved trail between WJ and Stein Park, with the concept being we've got the room down below in what's labeled Phase 1 on this map to have a adjacent soft surface trail. Once you get above this point of demarcation between Phase 1 and Phase 2, you enter into the gorge proper, where there really isn't room to have two trails side by side, and the decision point in the management plan was to leave that upper stretch alone and see how this goes with a higher level of maintenance. But the decision at the lower half was to go ahead and have the dual surface option, and our proposal is exactly what was contemplated in this management plan, which is to first build a soft surface trail adjacent to the existing trail, and once that is done, to be used as the main route, to then come back and pave this lower 2 miles. It's the section that tends to get chopped up more, and it's harder to keep it compacted. So we think for the people that are looking to kind of increase the rideability of that reach of trail, that it's going to go a long way to doing that. Our budget numbers are, again, pretty darn close to what we projected. We projected 1.43, and we're asking for 1.46. We did not budget this during the annual budget process, because we don't really like to lock ourselves in to a number when we're about to go out for competitive bids. And we did earmark this amount of money in our sort of cash flow plan for the year. So the Open Space Board last week unanimously moved to recommend appropriation of this amount, and we have the contractor standing by ready to get going on this. So just as the Moore property purchase was something that grew directly out of the plan adoption, this is the second big appropriation that is flowing from the exercise that we went through.
Questions? George?
How wide will this path be, the paved?
I believe it's 10 and 4, except for area where we've got a constraint, which is, I'm sorry, this guy isn't working, but right down at the right side of your page where you get close to the crossing of the Smith Hill grade there.
Point to it on the
Plain Flats, okay. We've got a section in here where we're going to be going more like 8 feet and 4 feet, because there are constraints that went around the old quarry at Jaffe Park there. But for the main part of this, we're going to do 10 and 4.
10 paved, 4 soft, is that?
Correct.
Steve?
Dale, is the crusher fines the best surface for putting pavement on, or would there be another surface, 3/4 road base or something that would be better, or does it matter?
Well, crusher fines are probably overkill, but they're there and they're compacted, so that should be pretty easy to lay down. It's also an old railroad grade that, of course, is quite compacted from that use as well.
So they'll be able to just pave right over that, basically.
I don't know exactly what their specifications are, but we're not anticipating very much prep work on that existing trail.
And are we still in a wait and see for Phase 2 ideas, thoughts?
Very much so. The concept of the plan is to see how this goes with this lower reach paved, and well, the vision being that if we have enhanced level of maintenance on the soft surface, it's actually a soft surface is maybe a misnomer, a well-maintained, compacted surface, but without asphalt on it, that the hope is that maybe it'll just stay that way. But if we have some years go by and there's public dissatisfaction, then the whole decision about which route to use for a paved connection that's continuous into Aspen can be revisited in the future.
Michael?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the hard surface trails aren't subject to hard use, really. A bicycle really isn't for asphalt. Where the hard surface trails suffer is vegetation coming up from underneath the hard surface. And I think that in the long term, that problem needs to be addressed with some design modifications. I'm not sure what it is. And the soft surface in the gorge part, the problem, one of the major problems there is the sloughing of shale, either just dry shale or shale that occurs after or during a rain event. And so, I mean, one of the things that occurs to me there is there is vegetation growing on some of that shale, interestingly enough, and whether or not promotion of vegetation on those shale surfaces using native materials that are already growing there, whether that isn't a solution long term to keeping those trails slightly cleaner, I don't know, but I think it's worth looking at. So, because the hard surface is, the hard soft surface is a good surface, and I don't know what that maintenance would be on it, but I think it could last for a very long time to many people's satisfaction, given a new regimen of maintenance on it.
And we have budgeted an increased amount to keep that clear. Of course, you never know when you're going to get a catastrophic mud flow through there. So we're crossing our fingers this year.
Steve?
That gives me an idea, Michael, that the Hope Mine looked pretty much like that shale hillside along this stretch of the bike trail. And that's was totally revegetated using the biochar and some compost and some things that might be worth considering doing that, or doing a test on part of that shale hillside, which would be on the phase 2 part of the thing, but that could be a solution to keep a lot of that shale stuff from sloughing down onto the trail.
So we have a supplemental budget in front of us for $1.463 thousand or $1.463 million, I guess that would be. Direction to move ahead?
Okay.
Thank you.
John, does this take a formal vote?
It will come back in a formal resolution. We put all the enrollments together.
Great. Thank you.
Next, we have a budget supplemental request for incident response. Ryan.
Good afternoon. As everyone is aware, we had the incident in February that created quite an impact on the community, and specifically in the resources that we had to manage, and in order to investigate this with the quality that my boss demands, and I think the community does as well, required extra expenses. It's hard to plan for something like this because we don't see a whole lot of crimes that require this level of investigation and management of an incident this size. So the budget for it would be difficult to do. So we're requesting through our supplemental to help offset the financial impacts that our budget has received because of this investigation.
Questions?
Are you referring to the Pfister investigation?
I am.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question just about the sheets layout here. We've got the original budget amounts at $100,000 for sheriff's overtime and $40,000 for jail overtime. That's kind of the initial budget for anticipation throughout the year, normal activity, and we're increasing those by 85 for sheriff's overtime and 35 for jail overtime. Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
That is correct.
In addition to an incident response service for $25,000, incident response materials for $2,500, and incident response trailer $11,840. Can you explain a little bit what those three items are? What those three items consist of?
Yeah, let me see if I still have my notes. I was going to read this, but it's going up again in a minute, and I did not.
Mainly out of curiosity.
Each of those areas, yeah. Well, I can start with the trailer part. And it sounds like a recreational vehicle, but it's not. These are two very large storage containers that were needed to contain two vehicles that were taken in as evidence and part of this investigation. About 5 or 6 years ago, some of the statutes changed about how we deal with physical evidence because of biologicals, specifically DNA. And if we don't preserve the evidence that holds the biological evidence, it can go away forever and be destroyed. So it's climate controlled, and of course the security concerns that we had. Limited space that we have to actually store a vehicle to that level really didn't exist. So the best solution we could come up with was these controlled canisters, which are really shipping containers, are what they are.
Where do you get them, out of Denver?
Fleet got them for us. I don't know where they were shipped from, but it's like you would see on a Maersk, ship out there that holds them. And then we had to put some climate control as far as air conditioning and the security systems as well. So that represents two of those items for the 11,000.
Can I ask that? So, Ron, what would a community normally do in a case like that? Perhaps a similar sized community. I'm sure they probably have similar storage issues. I mean, how's that getting addressed?
Most agencies have some type of secure garage in their facilities. We just don't have that type of thing here. We looked at comparable size departments, and a lot of them do have newer buildings too, planning for this type of evidence storage. So they've already taken care of it before the need arose.
Because that's pretty large in terms of evidence. We're talking about a vehicle versus just clothing or just whatever for DNA.
Yep.
Getting to a fairly large structure.
Yeah, in an investigation such as a homicide, there could be really large items that we end up having to take, and then we have to find a way to store those. And it's pretty taxing as it is space-wise in our evidence vault and storage area as it is. We just couldn't accommodate it any other way.
Yeah, I think the evidence vault that is currently being used is about a quarter of the size of this meeting room. And so when we had to take in obviously vehicles, but also there's just large pieces of evidence, furniture and whatnot that didn't fit well, and that constrains it.
Steve?
Would you foresee keeping these two storage units for potential future use, or would you try to dispose of them once you no longer need to store the stuff in it now?
I've heard third hand that they're a hot item right now in the county. There are a couple of departments that are like, we could use something like that. It's our intention to at least keep one of them when we get to the point that we can release it. With the biologicals, we may have to retain some of this evidence for the life of a defendant. So it could be quite some time. One of them is about to be freed up very soon. But with our other evidence storage impacts that we have, and we've already got it with security controls and climate control, I think it makes sense for us to use that as our area to grow into until we find other solutions to our space needs.
And are you storing them are they at public groups, property right now, or?
They're in a secure building out at Public Works in one of their bays.
And the thought crossed my mind that potentially the newly relocated shooting range at the landfill could potentially be a secure area where you could keep a storage unit.
Yeah,
And
certainly
maybe
could be.
use it for storing some of the shooting range things possibly.
Yeah, we need utilities and such if we're still storing climate-controlled materials in there. So that's going to be a whole nother challenge. And, you know, certainly keeping it in a bay has displaced some public works and open space and trails equipment and functions. And so, space is an issue for us overall that we need to address. And while Ron's looking through his notes, maybe I'll take a moment to buy him some time and just talk a little bit about overtime while he's searching for the other two. Because as has been noted, on the overtime, we asked departments not to budget for the worst case scenario, to budget for a typical year. And so an exceptional event like this certainly threw us. In the case of the jail has typically actually budgeted less in overtime than it has been using even on a regular year. And we've been able to make up for that either through expenditure savings in the sheriff's department or in other places for the jail. And so it's really a double whammy for the jail this year that we had this exceptional event. The budget exceptions also ran to the sheriff's department, and they really didn't have anywhere to go. And I know that's going to be a budget item that we'll be bringing back to you guys for 2015 to look at. That buy you any time, Ron?
Go plenty.
Okay.
Yeah.
To answer your question, Robin, the response services is a line item we created to put in primarily logistical support, which with the Type 4 team active, when we lock a bunch of people into a room for extended hours, we've got to support them, primarily in food and resources such as that. We also used it to support some of our visiting investigative resources like CBI. To be able to have them here and house them here allowed us to rapidly conduct our investigation instead of having them travel back and forth between Grand Junction and Denver and back to here. The materials are some of the hard items we had to purchase to support, whether it's making maps and printing and items like that. And then, of course, the trailer is the evidence trailer.
The question before us is approving the supplemental budget. Does this supplemental budget, kind of alluding to what you said, John, with overtime, does this allow for the needs for the rest of the year? Or if there's any other incident, will we see an additional... Does this cover us to date, or does this get us back into a... We've got something in the coffers for the rest of the year?
This gets us back close to the point we would have been had we not had this incident. So if we have an incident next week, we're really back to step one again.
Okay. A little in the coffers, not much. Nod of heads. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any commissioner open discussion? None. So I will, at this point, take a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of county manager evaluation pursuant to CRS 246402-4F.
So move.
Second. We have a first and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Should maybe take a 10-minute break and come back in. So 255. Okay. Did you get a copy from Phyllis?
I did, yeah.
Thank you, John.